Okay, I'll do a slight introduction that is really short. Today is part 2 of a 3-part series on the history of Jewish art. Adrian from the Tucson area is now on.
Hi. So first thing hi, I can see a person, very nice. The first thing I'm going to do is close my video since I tend to talk with my hands and I'm distracting. So I'm disappearing for a while. And you're going to disappear from my screen for a while, and here I am. So today, this afternoon, we're going to, we will see spectacular paintings by women artists, Jewish women artists. There were a lot of really wonderful women artists to choose from, and honestly, each of today's artists really would deserve her own art essay devoted to her work alone. So today we're going to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It's going to be like a nosh. If you have questions, I will answer them at the end of my talk. So I invite you to enjoy. I started this because I wanted to do a bat mitzvah project. But as I got deeper into it, I did it out of pride, you know, just pride for how these beautiful women and these beautiful artists created work. I've discovered that Jewish women have made major contributions to the art world as artists, photographers, gallery owners, museum curators, art critics, art historians, and collectors from at least from the start of the 20th century. Now, some Jewish women painters achieved fame, but many of them remain little known to this day. Surprisingly, and this was surprising to me, it wasn't its Jewishness that held them back, but their womanhood. Most of these glorious painters lived in the shadow of their male counterparts or were overshadowed by their husbands in their lifetime. Today, I would like to introduce you to what I found to be some of really the most beautiful and intriguing paintings of the 20th century, and they were all done by Jewish women. As a dedication, I want to lead off today's discussion with another painting from Dora Europa. Now, this mural of Moses, women fetching Moses from the river, is from the Dora Europa Synagogue. It's one of the earliest known examples of Jewish art. It's Jewish narrative art. It's designed to show and tell a story. The Dora Europa Synagogue murals utilized biblical and midrash sources to create images that yearn for transformation in both the public and the personal arena. They established, beyond doubt, an ancient source of Jewish art and visual tradition in Jewish culture. The large-scale pictorial art in Dora Europa synagogues helps to dispel historical interpretations that prohibit visual images by Jewish artists. So now we're going to move way forward to the beginning of the 20th century. That a gifted artist could also be a mother, a society wife, and a religious, observant Jew was completely alien to the art world. That was true at the end of the 19th century, well into the 20th century, and some would argue it's still true today. I'd like to introduce Branka Cola Pinnell. She was an Australian expressionist painter who specialized in portraits and still lifes. She was born in a Jewish family in what is now Poland. Her father, Saul Pinellas, a designer of military fortification, moved the family to Vienna in 1870 and there started a manufacturing business and changed the family name to Pinellas. In 1885, when she was 23 years old, as a young woman from a very wealthy family, she started private art lessons. And this is one of her works, Morning Tea. Against her family wishes, she had her first public exhibition in 1896. Now, her work illustrates aspects of expressionism, where the artist seeks to convey an emotional experience to the viewer. Against her family's wishes, she married the physicist and industrialist Dr. Hugo Kohler. He was a Catholic, but she herself never converted. This is a portrait of her daughter, Sylvia. She herself was raised by Orthodox Jewish parents, and Kohler Pinel stayed true to her religious faith as she lived and worked among Christians and often faced anti-Semitism. This is a self-portrait of her. Like all Jewish women artists of her time, Kohler was captive of her traditional female role. Her artistic creativity was often tolerated because of her high social status and the wealth of her husband, despite the fact that she personally had participated in numerous national and international juried exhibitions. She participated throughout her life, but she was never really accepted among her male colleagues, both because she was a woman and frankly, because she was very, very prosperous. Kohler Pinel was active in Gustav Klimt's circle, regularly exhibiting with him and joining the Union of Austrian Artists that he had co-founded. She hosted him and other notable artists and thinkers at her lovely salons in her very large home. Despite her artistic accomplishments, she was often dismissed as the talented wife of a prominent husband. Now, it was just by chance that I discovered this woman. Now, this artist emerges from the perspective of an artist who conveys her social experience both as a woman and as a person of the Jewish faith. Now, note her age. Yes, it was 1890 to 2002. The dates are correct. Teresa Bernstein lived to be 112 years old. She was an active painter up to her 110th birthday. Her subjects included immigrants, suffragettes, and candid glimpses of everyday folks in public libraries, in parks, in music halls, and synagogues. She was trained as an illustrator, but she embraced the realistic, impressionistic, sort of expressionistic spirit of her time. This is one of hers. She often signed her paintings T. Bernstein because she knew that as a woman, she faced bias. One critic admired her for painting like a man, because obviously painting like a woman would be considered a bad thing. Bernstein's parents were from Vienna, She was born and studied art in Philadelphia. She was exhibiting in New York galleries and the National Academy of Design by 1913, and she was only 23 years old. Her first solo flight was 6 years later when she was 29. Her contact with Jewish circles and her adherence to Zionism grew after her 1919 marriage to the artist William Marowitzki. Now this is the Milners, women who worked on hats. This is from 1918, and it shows a group of ladies sitting around sewing hats. This was a personal subject for Bernstein. Her sister-in-law worked in the millinery industry. That was a vocation among that was available to immigrants and Jewish women. This is one of my favorites of hers. This is called The Immigrants, and it depicts figures grouped together on the bow of a ship. Like much of Bernstein's work, this picture sort of teems with life wherever you look. And it has rich sense of color that is mostly ochres and earth tones. Bernstein was born just 3 years after Georgia O'Keeffe. Now, both were very successful in their lifetime, yet Georgia O'Keeffe, her contemporary, achieved celebrity and lasting fame. Now, Georgia O'Keeffe's husband, Alfred Stieglitz, promoted O'Keeffe, and he photographed his lovely wife in the nude, while Bernstein's husband wouldn't let her show her work to anyone who came to the house. Now, Bernstein's work strive for realism in the here and now. Our next artist's goal was to set color free. This remarkable woman was one of the foremost painters of her day, Sonia Delaunay. She was born in a small village in Ukraine, and she was the youngest of 3 children. In those days, and they were poor people, they were very poor, but she was adopted by a wealthy maternal uncle, Henrik Tropp, a childless relative in St. Petersburg. She was reared in a moneyed environment in which literature, music, and art were highly prized, and foreign travel was regarded as a necessity. She studied art in Germany, and then in about 1905, she moved to Paris. She lost no time in making her mark in Paris, and at 23, in 1908, she had her first solo exhibition at a gallery run by the German critic and dealer Wilhelm Udo. Now, she and Udo made a marriage of convenience to reassure her family in Russia as to the seriousness of her behavior in Paris. Udo knew everybody. He knew everybody who was worth knowing in Paris, and one of these people was the young painter, Robert Delaunay. You see where I'm going with this. Robert and Sonia had everything in common, and after she was divorced she and Delaney were married in 1910. By 1914, Sonia Delaunay had established the general framework within which her entire career was to be lived. What she created was a style of art that would also be a way of art. As she saw it, art theory was not independent from life. What was good for life must be good for everything else. She designed everything in this room, and at one time or other, these are some of the products that she became famous for. Now, at 28, she painted this really spectacular piece. It's 3 feet by 12 3/4 feet. This enormous painting is of a popular Parisian dance hall with dancers swirling, to kind of imagine dancers swirling, under the halos of electric lights. And this became a style that was always associated with her. And this ultimately is her trademark style. She used concentric circles as reflections at their best. And this is interpreted as ode to modernity. Delaunay reflects the light and bustle of the Boulevard St. Michael's into almost complete abstraction. So you can imagine. This is right after the turn of the century. In her childhood memories of Ukraine, she often referred back to the pure color and bright costumes she saw at Ukrainian peasant weddings. This is one of hers. Now, as a result of the Russian Revolution, her ample family income came to a screeching halt. And in the early 20s, she turned her hand to mass-produced fabrics. She made costumes and scenery for the stage and designs for tapestry and carpets. This Gloria Swanson coat was a matter of pride for her. She loved the idea that her unmistakable imagery was familiar to people all over the world, all over Europe, who had never once seen any of her paintings. She, in her lifetime, collaborated with Lanvin, Chanel, and other couture fashion designers. And at one time, she stocked a shop stocked entirely with her own designs. I got to show you this next one. She even, sorry about that. She even designed, that's one of her coats, one of her dresses, and that's a car she designed. In 1930, she went back to painting as her primary activity. She was commissioned for the Paris exhibition in 1938, and her large-scale painting panels for the Railroad Pavilion were awarded a gold medal by the exhibition judges. And this is a picture of that. But they're more than 20 feet wide, just to give you an idea. And Delaunay was the first living female artist to have a retrospective exhibition at the Louvre in Paris in 1964. She also has her work shown at the Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum, the Tate Museum in London, the Muséum d'Arts Décoratifs in Paris, and of course, the Museum of Modern Art in Paris. Delaunay used vivid colors, vivid color contrast, and geometric designs. Our next artist focused on lyrical, everyday life. This also was a surprising find for me. Sallie Michael. She was born in Brooklyn. Sallie knew from around the time she was 5 or 6 that she had the drive and the desire to become an artist. She began working immediately after high school as a freelance illustrator, creating fashion illustrations for Macy's, and was a contributor to the family column, You and Your Child, in the New York Times Magazine. We're talking 18, 19-year-old girl started this. And for the next 20 years, she was part of the New York Times magazines. While working, she also took evening classes at the New York Art Students League. She met her husband in 1924 while she spent the summer painting in Gloucester, Maine. They married in 1926, and over the following decades, she supported her husband's career by working as a commercial illustrator, enabling him to continue painting until his work began to sell. She served as the primary source of income for their small family. Throughout the Great Depression, she continued to work. And just imagine, during that time, she was earning $35 an hour for her commercial work in illustration. This is in the Great Depression. So she was really very appreciated. Michal Avery was driven to advance her husband's career with curators and collectors and art dealers. She was always what we would call nudging them. She only showed her own work on rare occasions during her lifetime and often downplayed her own talent. She often painted landscapes and figures in flat plains of rich color.
Class from
People,
they're giving an art lecture.
okay. Thank you. People were often represented with no identifiable facial features. She used techniques and stylized forms that were very similar to what you see if you saw her husband's paintings, Milton Avery. But she used more vivid coloring and much, I don't know, in my eyes, more playful combinations. This is Two Blondes. Michal Avery's works were often smaller and the paint was applied thicker. Her subjects seemed so content that they seemed to blend into their surroundings. Now, when I went to art school, you were told, don't use a lot of yellow, it jumps off on the page. But here she uses colors, yellows, a range of yellows, and they don't jump off the page. They actually convey sort of this calming, relaxing theme. Michal Avery employed alternating areas of pale and rich color to convey a scene rather than copy it. Her work was characterized by this blending of the background and the foreground, and then the result is that you have a flat surface. Now, this landscape is when she was 74. 1976. This landscape is from 2002, when she was 100 years old. Sally Michal Avery died at the age of 100 in January 2003 in New York City. The art critic, Robert Hughes, stated that the female artists of the 40s and 50s were trapped in a sort of cultural apartheid. The ruling assumption of that time was about the inherent weakness and silly femininity of women. Hugo goes on to say, it was an almost unbelievably chauvinistic period, and that was the 40s and 50s. Our next artist really fought against these characteristics, and some of you might know her. Her work is direct, it's vigorous, it's demanding encounters between the psyche of the artist and that of the viewer, and I'd like to introduce you to Lee Krasner. Also a wonderful find, even though I knew the name. She was born in 1908, the daughter of Russian Orthodox Yiddish-speaking Jewish family who had fled their shtetl outside Odessa. Her family moved here and lived in Bronzeville, Brooklyn, which had a large population of poor Jewish immigrants. Her father spent most of his time in prayer and study, while her mother kept up the household and the family business, a fruit and vegetable stand. As a teenager, she grew critical of what she perceived as misogamy in Orthodox Judaism, but she remained appreciative of aspects of Judaism like Hebrew script, prayer, and religious stories. She was named Lena Krasna. This is her birth name. The birth name is up here on the top. She was named Lena Krasna, but in 1922, she adopted the more American Lenore, but later this would become the androgynous gender-neutral Lee. At some point, she dropped the second S in her surname, so she would sign her work with the name Lee Krasner. This was not unusual for someone from an immigrant family, but it fit with Lee Krasner's desire to, she liked to reinvent herself. So whether it was a common practice or not, she might have done it anyway. As for her family background, Krasner said, "My parents didn't encourage me so long as I didn't present them with any particular problems, but neither did they interfere. Though there was one family controversy in which she was involved. In 1928, her older sister Rose died suddenly, and according to traditional custom, according to traditional custom, she was required, Lee Krasner was required to marry her sister's widower, Rose's widower. Krasner flat out refused, and the responsibility fell to her younger sister, Ruth. After that, the two women had a very difficult relationships. Interestingly, remnants of her upbringing as the daughter of Orthodox Jewish immigrants survived in her habit of working on her paintings from right to left, the way Hebrew is written. I thought I should call this section The Many Faces of Lee. Now, in a lot of art talks, you see one style, the artist has that similar style. These paintings were all done within a few years, 3 of them within a year, and they were all different looking. Eleanor, what's her name? Naron, the Barbican Gallery curator said, and I quote, "Krasner believed art was an expression of the inner self. To have a signature image, like we've seen in the painters before this, to have a signature image would be to suggest that there were no contingencies in life. Krasner couldn't accept that one style could express all the dimensions of her authentic self. She didn't follow any of the modern art movements for long. She worked in all kinds of media. She worked with paint and canvas and collage and mosaic. She did self-portraits, still lifes, and abstract art." Is everything okay? Okay. When Krasna saw the work of Jackson Pollock, she is quoted as saying, "When I saw his paintings, I almost died. They bowled me over, and then I met him, and that was it." A thunderbolt. They married in 1946, and she became known after that, not as Lee Krasna, but as Mrs. Jackson Pollock. By the way, the name on the wedding certificate was Lenore Krasner with a double S, so her legal name remained Lenore Krasner. Krasner was a fervent booster of her husband's work, outspoken in her conviction that he was, like she liked to say, numero uno. Despite his years of alcoholic turbulence, she gave up long periods of her life to promote and support Pollock, putting her own needs aside. This is a beautiful piece of hers. This is on paper and it's a collage. While living with Pollock, she tried to preserve her own style, but she did adopt his overall design and thick impasto, which means he applied paint, and it could be as much as a ½ inch off the canvas. It's so thick. Pollock was killed in a car accident driving while drunk in 1956 at the age of 44. Krasner was 48 at the time. Now, this is happening the year after his funeral. She went right back to the studio and began painting in a series of shades of gray, black, and pink. And then when she was asked, how could she paint in the midst of grief, she said, "Painting is not separate from life. It is one." It is like asking, do I want to live? My answer is yes, and I paint. Now look how this is sort of, I don't know, it always looks brooding to me, or I don't know what it looks like, but it's like brooding. Look at this one, same year. She exhibited this piece. Some complain that Krasna does not have her own one style, but this artistic impatience and desire to change direction was intentional. She said, Krasna said, "I change medium to re-stimulate myself. It gets me working, and that's the important thing." Krasner was 74 before she finally got her first American retrospective, and that was staged at Houston Museum of Fine Arts in 1983. Her works are in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum, the Modern Museum of Art in New York, the Guggenheim Museum, the Whitney Museum, just to name a few. And this 8-foot by 16-foot painting, the name of it is "The Eye is the First Circle," was sold in May of 2019 for $11.7 million. It has a little mystery attached to it. It was stolen in 1991, and it was retrieved soon after by an anonymous tip. Now, Lee Krasner painted to fully express her authentic self. Our next artist's emphasis was on spontaneity. And a quote from her is, "A really good painting looks as if it happened all at once." Let me introduce you to Helen Frankenthaler. She was born in New York City. Her father was Alfred Frankenthaler, a respected New York Supreme Court judge. Her mother was from Germany, arriving in the United States shortly after she was born. Frankenthaler grew up on Manhattan's Upper East Side and had the privileged background of a cultured and progressive Jewish intellectual family. They encouraged her and her two sisters to prepare themselves for a professional career. Frankenthaler chose art. She went to Birmingham College in Vermont, and she also studied at the Art Students League in New York. Her adolescence was complicated by the death of her beloved father in 1939 and by the harrowing effects the Holocaust had in the ensuing years on her mother. Frankenthaler had a major impact on color field painting with her creative breakthrough, and that's this one called Mountains and Sea. In 1953, art critic Clement Greenberg brought artist Morris Louis to her New York studio, where he saw and was greatly impressed by this stain painting. Upon his return to Washington, Louis experimented with various techniques of paint application, and we will see, and he became very well known, and we'll see the results of that visit in Who Knew 3, Driven to Abstraction. Now, this was interesting. To create her paintings, Frankenthaler stood over an unstretched canvas placed on the floor. And then she poured paint that was thinned out with turpentine from coffee cans. And she allowed it to spill and drip and splatter. Many have attributed the beginnings of her famed soak and stain, that's what they're called, the technique, they traced it back to a habit from her childhood. As a child, on New York Upper East Side, she would fill the bathroom sink with cold water and pour her mother's red nail polish into it, allowing it to disperse and create abstract forms in the water. Now, her parents were amused by this behavior, but I suspect the family maid was not. The Jewish identity of Helen Frankenthaler was expressed in her work. She used Jewish motifs during periods of high emotion or emotional crisis in her life, such as this piece that followed the death of her mother. The powerful art critic Clement Greenberg, who she dated during the 50s, once attributed the success of her work to a searching quality, its inwardness, which he called Innerlichkeit. Sounds very Yiddish to me. Which he felt was the real task. Looking inward was the real task for the American Jewish artist. Following the Cyanide Campaign of 1856, she painted Mount Sinai. The dynamic forms, if you look, to me, suggest the mountain and then a divine revelation that took place. She told the New York Times in 1989, "What concerns me when I work is not whether the picture is a landscape or whether it's pastoral or whether somebody will see a sunset in it. What concerns me, did I make a beautiful picture?" Jacob's Ladder is quite beautiful. Jacob's Ladder was done in 1957, the year she met Robert Motherwell. Frankenthaler used color with abandonment. And now this was a time in the artistic arena that there was hesitancy about any gesture that might be considered, especially for women, any gesture in their painting that might look frivolous or sentimental. Now, in terms of perception and acceptance in the art world, Frankenthaler had more than her gender taken into consideration. She came from a well-to-do family. She had an Ivy League education. She was very attractive. She had good looks and very elegant manners. All set her apart from the artists of her time. She had a 5-year love affair with a powerful art critic, Clement Greenberg, and a 13-year marriage to artist Robert Motherwell, also very iconic artist. These tidbits of biography worked for and worked against her in the art world that was skeptical of privilege. In a way, Frankenthaler had to work harder to overcome the perception that she was a lucky woman and not a talented one. Helen Frankenthaler was a major contribution to post-war American painting, exhibiting her work for over 6 decades from the early 50s until 2011. She's won numerous awards and is in the collection of MoMA, the Metropolitan, the Guggenheim, and the Whitney. Our next artist is one of the first women to enter the collection of MoMA in the Modern Museum of Art. And she said, what makes for great art is the courage to speak and write and paint what you know and what you care about. And I'd like to introduce you to Audrey Flack. She's a painter and a sculptor and is especially recognized for the feminine content of her work. She earned a BFA from Yale University and a graduate degree and honorary doctorate from Cooper Union in New York City, and an honorary doctorate of fine arts degree from Clark University. She alone raised 2 daughters, one of which has special needs. And through the early 1950s, she painted as an abstract expressionist, but was not achieving what she felt was an important goal, and that was communicating with audiences. Because of this desire to create art that was clearer and the message was clearer to viewers, Flack began to move towards realism. I love this. There's no other painting like it. This work of classic Passover-style food started with Flack assembling boxes that she had available at home. In an interview, Flack acknowledged in retrospect how innovative her painting was for its time, notably in its content, in the Jewish domestic everyday content. She said, as I was painting the boxes of Manischewitz matzah meal, I remember stopping, holding up my brush and thinking, oh, this is kind of Jewish subject has never been painted before, at least not in any paintings that I've seen in the museum or in history books. And I second that. It gave me a moment's pause, she said. I decided to go on. It was important. Flack understood that she had integrated her essence as a woman, as a Jew, and as an artist in this one creation. Art critic Robert Morgan wrote, Flack has taken the signs of indulgence, beauty, and excess and transformed them into deeply moving symbols of desire, futility, and emancipation. Now, Flock sets up the still lifes for her paintings in much the same way that the Dutch 17th century realistic painters did. She carefully arranges and balances the objects until she achieves a vigorous unity of composition. As with all her paintings, it takes her as many as 150 photographs before she can settle on a suitable one out of which she would create the painting. As soon as the still life is arranged and it's suitably documented, she dismantles it. The selected photograph is projected onto the canvas, and Flock then uses airbrush to work over the image with films of color. Flock was a pioneer in what is now called photorealism painting. She started the movement. Flock is still the only female member of the founding group of photorealists. Here's another one that really touched me. Flock states, I grew up during World War II. My brother returned home from the war with personal horror stories. Images of the war were imprinted in my brain. This was a subject that I knew I had to deal with someday. The war ended in 1945, and I didn't even start this painting until 1975. It took 30 years for me to paint World War II. Flock explains this painting in her own words. I became aware of the fact that although much has been written and photographically documented, I could not think of any major painting on the subject of World War II. Why? Granada dealt with the Spanish Civil War, Picasso's people. What about my people? I had to do something about it. My idea was to tell a story, an allegory of war, of life, and the ultimate breakdown of humanity, the Nazi. I wanted to create a work of violent contrasts of good and evil, and I decided to use the Margaret Burke White's photograph of the liberation of Buchenwald. The prisoners in their striped uniforms, hollow faces, stunned beyond expression, was an example of Nazi brutality. I contrasted that image of the survivors with the sickeningly sweet pastries. The painting is about survival. The clock will strike 12. These prisoners will survive. They will be liberated, and they will go on to tell their story. Now, this painting is actually in the University of Arizona Museum. So you can go see it. It's Marilyn, is the title, is a commentary on the life and death and celebrity of Marilyn Monroe. It is a vanitas, which is a kind of painting, the style. A vanitas is a still life that alludes to the vanity of worldly pleasures and to a life's transient nature. It indicates both conventional vanitas symbols. You'll see an hourglass, a candle, and modern ones such like a photograph and a calendar. The open book is a biography of Marilyn, which contains the word, the page is open to, contains this word, paint yourself into an instrument of your will. All of the images are symbols of female conflict about self-image, truth versus falsity, and the constraints of time and aging, which I felt today. It is an amazing painting, and as I said, if you get to see it, it's at the University of Arizona. This is another interesting one, The Courage in Course in Miracles. Now, following a serious illness, Flack turned to mysticism, framing Christian and Hindu images with Jewish ones. Now, on the left side is a photograph of Albert Einstein and a European Jewish candlestick, a Friday night Shabbos candlestick. And that's flanked by a statue of Jesus. And on the right side, an Old Testament Bible with a silver cover and a photograph of Baba, a Hindu philanthropist. Flack's painting, The Wheel of Fortune, sends a message that fate is part of the cycle of life and that it is all played out by chance. This painting, too, is a vanitas, a still life that alludes to the vanity of worldly pleasures and to life's transient nature. Many objects illustrate the nature of this fragile life. The skull is front and center, and it's both in the reality of being on the table and in the mirror's reflection. A candle melts down almost to its end. And then there's a die. It's on the bottom, in the middle. A die is cast because in the end, is fate anything more than a roll of the dice? A tarot card reveals the very human need to see the future. And the hourglass, which I had trouble finding originally, it's right over here. And the hourglass reminds us as the passage of time always marching on. The sands drop through the hourglass and the candle melts away. This painting also is referred to as what goes around. This just gives you an idea of how big the paintings are. Flack has won many awards and her work is held in collections of museums around the world, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Modern Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, the Guggenheim Museum, the Whitney Museum, and the National Gallery of Australia, to list just a few. Our next artist has devoted her life to creating an enlarged definition of art, an expanded role for women art, and for women's right to the freedom of expression. She said, I am trying to make art that relates to the deepest and most mythic concerns of human beings. Judy Chicago, you could see her original birth name. Judy Chicago was born into a Jewish family in Chicago. Her father, Arthur Cohn, came from a 23 generation lineage of rabbis, including the Lithuanian Vilna Gaon. Breaking with his family tradition, her father became a labor organizer and a Marxist. He worked nights at the post office and took care of his daughter during the day, while her mother worked as a medical secretary. Her father's liberal views towards women and supportive workers' rights strongly influenced Chicago's own thinking and her beliefs. Her name, Judy Chicago, by the way, started as a nickname by a friend due to her notably thick Chicago accent. Now, the emphasis, and we'll see more of that, the emphasis on mortality and the affirmation of life in her work which you'll see in a moment, may stem from her many tragic and early losses. Her father died when she was 13. At 17, her best friend, her best childhood girlfriend, perished with her family at a railroad crossing, and at 23, her first husband died in an automobile accident. So that was, in 10 years, she lost substantially the people that she loved in her life. Chicago has a BFA and an MFA from UCLA. And she began the first feminist art program at California State University in Fresco in 1970. And the next year, she founded the feminist art program at California Institute of the Arts in Valencia. Chicago is the recipient of numerous grants and awards, including an honorary doctorate of fine arts from Russell Sage College in Troy, New York, and Smith College in Northampton, and Lehigh University in Bethlehem, PA, and Duke University from Durham, North Carolina. She has been included in the Times Magazine 100 Most Influential People of 2018. Many films have been produced about her work. Perhaps she is best known for her iconic The Dinner Party, which celebrates women's history through place settings designed for 39 important women, illustrious women of the past, who were each given a sculptured place setting, an embroidered runner, and napkins that documented her achievements and significance. And you can see those. In addition, the names, and they're all in here, of 999 women is inscribed on the floor where this ceremonial meal took place. The collaborative project incorporated traditional women's crafts, such as embroidery, needlepoint, and ceramics. The International Honors Quilt. The International Honors Quilt is a collaborative, grassroots feminist art project initiated by Judy Chicago in 1980. And she did it to extend the spirit of the dinner party. It toured venues throughout North America, Europe, and Australia. It consists of a collection of 539 individual quilts that can be assembled into a multi-sectional, monumental piece of work. The panels used a wide variety of materials and techniques made by individual women and groups to honor selective women, women's organization, and women's issues. From 1980 to 1985, Chicago worked on the Birth Project, having observed in an absence of artwork about the subject of birth in Western art. So out of that, she designed a monumental series of birth and creation images for needlepoint, which was completed under her supervision by skilled needle workers around the country. There are 85 embroidered, quilted, crocheted, and woven parts produced by volunteers to celebrate the personal and archetypical creative powers of women. And you can look that up on the web. Holocaust. In the 1980s, Chicago reconnected with her Jewish identity, and she created the Holocaust Project called From Darkness to Light. It is a traveling exhibit that evolved from 8 years of inquiry, travel, study, and artistic creation. And this is, you can see this lit up, and I'm going to show you a close-up. All kinds of poke. And the plaque on the bottom, close-up, is always moving to me. Heal those broken souls who have no peace and lead us all from darkness into light. Many of these wonderful artists lived, as I said, in the shadow of their male counterparts, or they were overshadowed by their husbands in their own lifetime. Some, as you saw, achieved lasting fame, but some remain little known, and to me, their work represents some of the most beautiful and intriguing paintings of the 20th century. These Jewish women artists express their life experience, their heritage, and their spirit in their artwork, and I am really happy to have had this opportunity to present them to you. I'll be back next week, same time, same spot. Please join me for the last talk of this series when we will be discussing abstract art. Abstract art uses a visual language of shape, form, color, and line to create a composition which may exist independent of any visual references in the world. And the most famous and fabulous abstract artists in the world were Jewish. You are in for a surprise. I'd like to end with this quote from Judy Chicago. I believe in art that is connected to real human feelings, that extends beyond the limits of the art world to express all people. I like that. Thank you for this afternoon. I hope to see you next time, same place, same time. And if there are any questions, I would love to answer them.